So let's just start with this, shall we, Don? A quick recap.
Is it great again yet? Trump declared this American carnage ends right here, right now. We all thought, what the fuck is he talking about? Turns out he just misread the auto cue. It actually read, this American carnage starts right here, right now. It wasn't a statement of fact, it was a promise. We are going to lie to you. We're going to lie to your face and punish anyone who calls it a lie. The statement was, the truth no longer matters. Reality is negotiable. His presidency started with the first of many lies. His presidency ended with a mob smashing up Congress because they'd been lied to and believed the election was stolen from them. Where do you think they got that idea? American carnage. And that's what they got. As they were clearing up the blood and taking the dead bodies out of the Capitol building, it still took him 2 days to condemn the violence. And only because there was serious talk of evoking the 25th. He fucking loved it. Just the way he likes it, fanning the flames of hate and division. He spent 4 years calling black guys taking a knee at a ball game anti-American sons of bitches. 6 months ago, he happily tear-gassed peaceful protesters so he could get a photo op. But when protesters storm Congress, replace the American flag with a MAGA one, take a shit on the Senate floor and beat a police officer to death, we love you, special people, true patriots, running around Congress, waving Confederate flags, brandishing baseball bats. What could be more American? He refuses to chastise anyone who supports him, no matter how fucking mad or criminal they are, because his ego is as big as his penis is small. Last week, Trump finally said that no true supporter of his would ever resort to violence. Difficult to swallow, seeing as most of them were waving flags with your fucking name on them, covered head to toe in MAGA merchandise. Is it great again yet? Is it? I remember before he won, he promised, we'll have so much winning if I get elected that you'll get bored of winning. And yet he leaves office as the country's biggest loser in history. He's lost the House, the Senate, the popular vote twice, and the White House. He lost 1 million Americans their health insurance, as well as 400,000 American lives because of his willful indifference to COVID-19. Sorry, Kung Flu, as he hilariously puts it. And because of his attacks on democracy, he's lost the respect of the entire planet. You now have places like Iran lecturing America about the evils of populism. High fives all across the Kremlin. Mission accomplished. That was Scottish. Beijing, for the first time ever, allowing an insurrection to actually be broadcast on its TV screens. He's lost America the right to do what America does best. Lecture the rest of the world about democracy. It's now clear that his stolen election myth is there to hide his weakness, hide the fact that he is a loser with an ego so fragile he'd rather undermine democracy than admit to his most rabid supporters that he lost. And you know why we know beyond any doubt that he lost? Because of the unprecedented number of court rulings, safety checks and recounts that Trump's lies gave rise to. The 60 legal challenges laughed out of court meant Trump's own election security team declared the election the most secure in America's history. Even Bill Barr conceded there was no significant fraud. If he'd have gone quietly, his grip on the Republican Party was assured. Let's not forget, Trump won more votes than any Republican in history. If he'd have been smart, he'd have been the presumptive nominee next time. But he's not smart. He can barely string a fucking sentence together, other than, I'm the best. In an attempt to save himself and his wafer-thin ego, he ended up sabotaging himself and his party, who are now reaping the rewards for having enabled him for so long. How do they recover from Trump? As one commentator put it, Trump wore the Republican Party like a rented tuxedo, and now they face the dry cleaning bill. He leaves behind a party whose base now consists of conspiracy theorists dressed up as Beowulf. The party that ended slavery now goes to great lengths to suppress the black vote. The party of traditional family values now pays off porn stars. The pro-globalization party has a protectionist president. The Second Amendment party has seen its spiritual sibling, the NRA, go from all-powerful to bankrupt. The pro-life party, thanks to Trump, doesn't believe in wearing masks to protect the lives of its fellow citizens. The party of law and order, fuck me. The law says, you fucking lost the election, mate. The law says, don't incite people to break into the Capitol in an attempt to hang the vice president. Law and order. This president has taken a liquid shit over both of those concepts. The party of fiscal responsibility just added $9 trillion to the national debt, and yet Donald Trump is so deluded he believes he's the greatest American president since Lincoln. But the truth is, he'll be remembered as the worst president in modern history. A man with so little reverence for the seat of office he was elected to, he's willing to sell presidential pardons for a cool $2 million ago. A man with so little respect for his devout followers that he's willing to ask them to donate to his Stop the Steal campaign so he can pay off his debts. A man feeling so castrated since his resounding loss that he's demonstrated his power by sending as many people to the electric chair as he can before leaving office. Donald Trump, the unpresidential president, loud, brash, like a pantomime dame without the dress or the makeup, without the dress. Anyway, I mean, what sort of shit white supremacist makes himself look like a tangerine? A lame duck à l'orange president, a fucking lunatic who wishes child rapists well, the people's president who gives billions to the top 1%, a sociopathic, ill-informed, self-righteous, subliterate, gurning, dog-whistling, know-nothing xenophobe for whom all Mexicans are rapists, all Muslims are terrorists, struggling third world nations are shithole countries, and where white supremacists and proud boys are fine and special people, an ignorant, amoral, war hero mocking petulant authoritarian who showers praise on murderous dictators while undermining America's allies, a heartless, paper towel throwing demagogue, a covfefe inventing, tax return withholding, flatulent pig, a president who takes no responsibility, for whom the buck stops somewhere over there, a president who quotes Mussolini, who openly wants to fuck his own daughter, a vicious reactionary scumbag, a Putin filleting spiteful charlatan, a gluttonous lobotomized mushroom-dicked sexual predator parading his dangerous ignorance as if it's a virtue, a disgusting, morally bankrupt bully, a supremely entitled, tasteless, talentless, draft-dodging, gaslighting misogynist who locks kids up in cages, a bleach-injecting super-spreader who abolished the pandemic preparedness response team because it had Obama's name on it, resulting in 4,000 deaths a day, an economy in tatters, job numbers down the Swanee. Is it great again yet? I could go on, but, like I say, it's Biden's special day. So, should we just go with divisive?
Yes, I thought a rather considered tone there from Jonathan Pie, the wonderful Jonathan Pie. I had the Don with me as ever. We're talking to each other for the first time in ages from Zoom because COVID has gone bonkers in Ireland. We'll have more of that a little bit later. But let's just first start by celebrating the end of the orange one. Don?
Yay! Yeah, it's kind of weird because it was a nice silence for a week or two before the inauguration where, he just couldn't tweet, he couldn't do anything, but we're all kind of waiting for something to happen. It's kind of a weird anticlimax now. The end of an era and Orange Mussolini is no more. It is hard because he didn't get there by himself. He rode a wave that was there and he made it a hell of a lot worse.
After so many years of this guy, it was just astonishing to me as well. And also the way the Republican Party members in Congress and in the Senate and the House are just so lickspittle towards him, and they continue to promote his lies and everything. It's just rancid. The whole place is just rancid. And I think it's possibly a false dawn because there's still so much division out. The next 4 years are going to be critical and see how Biden... it's just great to be able to see some adults in the room on everything from COVID and climate and everything. And also the fact that he left and he's kind of just gone. It's like he vanished in a puff of smoke, taken off Twitter and now he's out,
Yeah, it's like, it's funny because I've often, with that and also with Brexit, I often kind of draw the comparison to like a really shitty boyfriend or husband. And it's like, it was such a big deal and he had power to cause so much trouble. And he did cause so much trouble, but now he's just kind of gone and it's a bit like, sure, he's nobody now. Nobody really gives a shit. He has no power.
Yeah, I mean, he'd be back in time for his second impeachment, which will be probably fun. Just to see how that goes.
Yeah.
So yeah, since we were last with you, we're here again, but we've had, a January that's possibly worse than most of 2020, with the exception of that little bit of good news about Joe Biden going into the White House.
Yeah, 2020 was a terrible year for most people. It was fuck 2020, and look, we all know the date changing to 2021 wasn't going to suddenly make everything magically better. But it's been particularly shit. Certainly in Ireland, COVID-wise, it's much worse. I don't think that's particularly unique. It's like we're back to square one, but kind of worse. And I think everybody's exhausted and motivation is kind of gone. There's a sense of that. Last year, when it was really bad and most countries were in lockdown, like I could sense an awful lot of anxiety. Like even when you're going to the shop, people were just much more snappy, and like the world is in trauma, and there's a huge anxiety there. And I think a lot of people didn't necessarily know. They kind of like, well, I'm fine, I'm not upset. Yeah, but you live in the world, you're picking up on that. Like you could see that. And what I sense now is not so much anxiety, but just I think people are really drained.
Yeah, I mean, just for those overseas listeners, Ireland went from being the best in the world, or the best in Europe, probably around the end of November in terms of its COVID numbers. And within 3 weeks, it was the worst in the world. To put into context, it took us something like 8 months to reach 40,000 infected, and we had 40,000 infected between the middle of December and the middle of January. It took us the whole of 2020 to reach 2,000 deaths, and we're probably going to have 1,000 deaths in January. And it's not just us, all over the world. You know, there were all these guys at the start, people like Dr. Thomas Ryan, who was one guy who stood out for me in March, April, May of last year, who were just basically saying, look, if you want to beat this thing, you have to go for zero COVID. You have to lock your airports, lock your ports, lock everybody home, get it down, get it out of the country. New Zealand did it. Victoria and Australia had to do it. And that's the only way you're going to beat it.
Yeah. And I mean, like I realise that every country has a slightly different situation. And yeah, we had some more complex situations in terms of closing borders and stuff like that. But at the same time, zero COVID or near zero COVID was the approach. And that was kind of largely laughed at. I'm not sure people necessarily believe their own bullshit. I think there's cognitive dissonance, and where people fall on the scale of where economy matters more and getting on with life matters more, or where health matters, regardless of which side of that you're on, not going for a zero COVID approach or as close to as possible has fucked over both sides, because it's like eventually it gets so bad where hospitals collapse, like you have to lock down whether you like it or not. And so there's been more rolling lockdowns, there's been more damage to mental health, there's been more economic damage, and we can't open up and we can't live normally like other countries have managed to, and there's been more death. So it's the worst of both worlds. Yeah,
well, there's very few countries who have managed this, you know. One of the things that's interesting is there's a philosophical argument coming out mainly from some guy in Italy, I think, who's basically saying that we all know that the reason that we're locking down and the reason that we're yo-yoing between trying to open up is two. I mean, on the one hand, we have a greed-based economy and a capitalist economy, which is all about getting people back to work, getting workers back working, getting the wheels of business. This is Donald Trump's approach to COVID in, spades. Okay. So he basically doesn't give a shit about people. The argument goes that this is all about demasking capitalism to show that really it doesn't care about the people.
Yeah.
We have grossly underpaid frontline staff, people who work in hospitals, people who work in hospitals across all levels, not just doctors, but nurses and porters and orderlies. We have people who empty our bins. We have people who work in supermarkets, all grossly underpaid. I made a joke about the fact that the ad industry is tootling away with people doing fucking gobshite work and getting paid ridiculous amounts of money for it. And we need to think about ways in which we can reset that. And I'm not sure we can. I hope we can. But this idea that we're now starting to borrow money and fix maybe infrastructure, and the same thing Joe Biden's talking about, and to a lesser extent, our friend over in the UK, maybe there will be some sort of a reset. What's your thoughts on that?
Most of us are living in a particularly capitalist society, and it's greed, and it doesn't really care about people. But there's also like that impacts on how we behave in a society. And so you can see it in attitudes as well. I'm all right, Jack. And I know some people are really struggling to put food on the table, and it's like they're really worried about their work. But there's also a huge amount of, this is too fucking hard. I don't want to do this. And, like, fuck everybody else. And there's some people who will openly say it that way. Well, like, fuck the week. There's an awful lot of people who are wishy-wash around excuses and, well, I think it's overblown and flat. Bollocks. Like, really what you're saying is, no, I'm all right, Jack. Not willing to make sacrifices. Fuck that. Because I don't see myself as vulnerable, and, I don't want to kick the vulnerable, but I'm not going to bend over backwards for them. No, that's too much. Sorry about that. You're on your own. So you can't magically overhaul a society, and we have a certain amount of infrastructure. So even if everybody woke up in the morning and decided we have to change this, we need to have a more democratic socialist society, as in, there's capitalism with a conscience, making sure that everybody in society is okay, not just out of kindness, but also because that this society of May Féin and look after number one doesn't work. We live together in communities, we live in societies, and that's the lesson here. We have to have more conscience, and we have to have responsibility to other members of society, or it's not going to work. And so I get that you can't just magic that better, even if everybody wanted to, because the whole system is built in a particular way. But it's becoming quite obvious from people's behaviour that even if we were able to change infrastructure and change the way that things are designed, there also needs to be a change in people's attitudes and understanding that it's not going to work. Society is not going to work unless we have responsibility to our fellow man.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we had Michael Sandel, an excerpt from him on a previous podcast. He's written a book about the meritocracy and how it's failed us. So on the one level, capitalism is built on a meritocracy, the American dream, the fact that if you work hard and pull yourself up by your bootstraps, you'll get on in life. That's all been proved to be not the case now. And so, we do need some sort of a new ism.
I suppose like my take on the meritocracy thing is, like, the American dream was always a fallacy. I think it's not true. I think it's bullshit. So I agree with that.
I'm not sure.
But there's,
I think it was a real thing in the 50s, rebuilding after the war, employees getting, unionized with medical benefits and fair salaries. I think there was a time in America, and, you can go all the way back to the foundation.
There were always people who got left behind.
Yes. Well, I think that's going to happen in any society.
Yeah, but when you pat yourself on the back and you just believe this bullshit line of everyone has a fair go in the American dream, the problem is eventually that group of people is going to get bigger and more diverse, the people who are left behind. But when you keep telling yourself this line that it's fair and everybody has a fair shot, it becomes more and more toxic. And like I've always considered to be the Oprah Winfrey thing, which is, she's loved and she gets on, gives the world a hug and reads The Secret and tells everybody that you can achieve whatever you want. And look what she came from, the poverty she came from. But she's a billionaire, and that's not going to happen for everybody. And it's like encouraging people, they're like walloping people on their knees with this baton of encouragement and pretending that you're helping.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know what's going to happen, but I don't think we'll ever go back to, first of all, I don't know how long it's going to take, but I don't think we're ever going to go back to the before times. I think we have to, not least because the next COVID is already with us and we're ignoring it. It's the climate issue and we're not ignoring it, but like it's snail's pace. Speaking of snail pace, vaccinations, also hilarious. It's as if the vaccination arrived and people went, oh my God, we haven't a vaccine. We've known the vaccine has been coming for 6 months now. And it's when it arrives, you go, oh, why don't you, and what about if maybe,
But sure, we fucking knew this. We knew this, this time last year was, I think yesterday last year was the first lockdown in Wuhan. But so we're nearly a year into this being a big thing rather than, oh shit, there's another one of those things going around in Asia. Oh well, doesn't tend to affect us. We're nearly a year into realizing this big world event is happening. But sure, we fucking knew then. The line is, look, we're waiting on a vaccination. A vaccination is going to be the key. And at the time I'm going, yeah, but when we do get a vaccination, first of all, half the dickheads that are complaining saying, we should be able to go out, we should be able to this, will be the same fuckers that'll say, I'm not taking the vaccine, and they'll also spread misinformation. And then aside from those, the governments will twiddle their fucking thumbs, especially ours, but I'm pretty sure it's the same in very many countries where they get on to whatever news show there is and make wishy-washy statements about, you know, we absolutely definitely will be looking into how we absolutely should and ought to, and there have been delays, but, you know, we strongly feel bollocks. What have you been doing all this time? If it's that big a deal, when you couldn't shut down when you needed to shut down, when you couldn't protect people because, you know, the country has to keep going, and then when you couldn't let people keep working because we have to protect people, it's a big fucking deal. The whole world has been in agreement. We're waiting on a vaccine to solve this nightmare. All we're trying to do for the next, however long it takes the vaccine comes, is we're trying to manage it. The problem won't be solved until we have a vaccine. And now we have a vaccine and they're going, yeah, we must set up a committee to figure out now how we might roll that. What the fuck have you been doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think the microcosm, and it actually dovetails perfectly with the climate issue, is what happened in the first lockdown, second lockdown, or over the summer and spring of last year was we locked down quickly and we suppressed things and everyone went, oh yeah, it's not that bad, blah, blah, blah. And the paradox is that if you lock down and everything's going well, then people go, yeah, now let's open up and start partying again, which is just the absolute worst thing to do. And it's all couched in language that I hate. It's couched in meaningful. We want to have a meaningful Christmas. Like, what the fuck's a meaningful Christmas? And, you know, a meaningful Christmas means loading the coffers of retail outlets and getting people out into restaurants. I mean, it's just, and that's basically what caused the problem here in Ireland. The meaningful Christmas horse shit. Most of the Irish people needed to go out for a pint. It was really important to go for a pint and get your hair done. It was encouraged. It wasn't just that it was absolutely forbidden. Big issue I had with the November lockdown, which wasn't really a real lockdown. My main problem with it was, for Ireland, all the shops were closed and they called it level 5, which is supposed to be the top level, except schools are open. And then anything that was essential stayed open. But of course, any fucking company that decides, or organisation, they were fed up and everybody nominated their work to be essential. And not that jobs aren't important, but there are so many people that I know of that office workers, okay, yeah, they got to stay home. But aside from that, so many other people were well able to work from home last time, but they were deemed essential this time. So no one took it fucking seriously and it wasn't enforced. By continuing this bullshit line of 6 weeks of saying that this is top tier lockdown, then people believe it's top tier lockdown, but they also see the kids are all going to school, everyone's going to work. It's not a real lockdown. So you're doing the economic damage, but no one's taking it seriously. And the worst part is eventually you have to lift the level 5. It can't stay forever. And when you do that a couple of weeks before Christmas, you're all but knocking on people's door saying, off you go to the pub now. Off you go. Yeah, one of the big conspiracy theories is that this is all about a major reset by the powers that be to try and control us. I wish it fucking was. I wish there was a major reset that actually said we're going to pay people a fair salary for what they do, and we're going to equalize capitalism and make it more equal. Make companies who are making billions have to give a lot of that money back into the society that created it. You know, the Apples and the Facebooks, yeah, I'm quite happy that they make billions. Well done, lads. But like, the quid pro quo needs to be in return, and not just giving for charity. I mean, like, you have to take your hat off to Bill Gates and people like that who do, and even Zuckerberg, who do put an awful lot of money back into charity, but in a systematic way where government takes a chunk, you know, and it goes bigger and bigger the more money you make, because you don't need to make, you know, there needs to be a kind of an idea, and it needs to be loose, it needs to be rough on, you know, what constitutes enough? What constitutes enough for an individual to earn? And what constitutes enough for a massive corporation to earn? And they can keep money in cash reserves in case they have hard times. But this whole idea of shareholder value and, you know, the stock market, which was basically the North Star that Trump was following, is egregious. The judging economies on stock markets, it's absolutely breathtaking, because there's absolutely no bearing on how people are living day to day. It doesn't really tell you the wealth of a country or the economic health of a country. It's just bullshit. I read this week that Ireland is the 13th most expensive country in the world. Do you know what number 1 and 2 is? Any guesses? Dubai. No, we've been there. Australia? No, Iceland. Oh, Iceland, yeah. Robbing bastards. Norway was fucking dear as well, but Iceland... Norway's number 2.
Yeah, like Norway, it's like you will be bankrupt if you intend on having a drink. Iceland is you'll be bankrupt for stepping inside the door.
However, both societies that look after their, most vulnerable better than, nearly every other country in the world. And that comes with a price. If you want to go and have a pint, it may cost you 10 quid, but you know what? That's the way it has to work, so that a fiver of that 10 quid can go into alcoholism, looking after alcoholics or whatever, So the idea that a place is expensive is always, frowned upon. I mean, I hate then you have a place like Ireland where it's really expensive and you don't feel that the money that the country's earning that's making it so expensive is being utilized and, allocated in A, ways that are meaningful, and B, ways that are controlled. David McWilliams, a famous Irish economist, talks about the infantilization of the civil service. The people, we'll talk about this in a few minutes, the people in government, any time there's a crisis, they're not charged with fixing the crisis. They bring in outside experts from accountancy firms or from strategic management firms. They kick the can down the road. They set up an inquiry or a tribunal to work out what are citizens, what do they call citizens assemblies, to go and investigate what the problem is. And years go by and nothing gets done. And, meanwhile, tenders go out for hospitals that aren't monitored properly by civil servants because they're just infantilized. And
when something like that happens, it reminds me of being in secondary school when you're like 13 or 14 and there's some female chaplain who spent a bit too much time in meditation circles and the prayer room is there and whatever's happened, like somebody might be stabbed, we'll all sit down and we'll pass a talking stick around and we'll really talk about what needs to happen and remember, like that's literally how it feels when they start stepping up this. We'll bring outside firms in, we'll have a quango, we'll have a citizens assembly. First we actually have to spend 2 years doing a report to decide what we should ask in the citizens assembly, and then we will ask the wrong thing, and then we don't know what to do about it. Bollocks! Fucking sort it out.
So anyway, a time of action, and let's hope America starts leading again. And, the early signs from Biden's administration is that they've hit the ground running, and he's put a whole pile of executive orders that are reversing a lot of the bonkers crap that Donald Trump put up. But literally shame on half of America for continuing to run with what is, clearly to the... I mean, I don't know if it's the rest of the world. I mean, there's lots... It doesn't mean everybody who voted for Trump is a racist, of course. It doesn't mean everybody who voted for Trump is a misogynist, because so many people in America just voted for Trump because they thought he'd reduce their taxes and increase...
No, honestly, look, that's the thing I have a problem with. Not everybody who voted for Trump is a racist or a misogynist. It's just that everybody who voted for Trump decided that those things weren't as important as their tax as they saw was going to happen.
So
fair.
So the macro view of the first world countries, and this also applies to how these countries treat developing countries, treat many of the countries in Africa. We just saw recently the Ugandan election happened during January, which is on the nose, to say the least. We're selfish. We're selfish in our own societies. We're selfish in our own country's approach to the outside world in terms of immigration, things like that. Not that we need to be letting everybody in, but we need to have a much more equal world. And we also need to gather together as a gang of citizens and human beings to try and protect the fucking planet. Let's hope that we start getting there. A few other things have happened in January, one of which is something close to your heart, one of which is something close to mine. I have an awful lot of friends and actually quite a good listenership in Vietnam. A lot of my friends, I did work in Vietnam when I was working out in Asia, one of my favorite countries in the world. And some of you may remember that not too long ago, I think 39 Vietnamese immigrants perished in a container lorry coming from France into Britain. Terrible deaths. They were texting their loved ones back home in Vietnam as they died in a poorly ventilated container. Most of the people apparently behind that operation, that trafficking operation, had been caught and this week were sentenced to fairly severe prison sentences, which is good enough for those scumbags. The reason I bring it up is that a high percentage of them were Irish, which is another shameful thing for us to have to deal with as a people. And shame in this country is something that you grow up with. It is something that is built into you as a small child. You were told to be ashamed of your body. You're told to be ashamed of sex. You're told to be ashamed of your thoughts. You're told to be ashamed of anything to do with sin. And that has been slowly being chipped away, thank God, no pun intended, over the last maybe 20 years. We've had issues, those of you around the world listening will know, with paedophilia in the priesthood, which has been uncovered, and again through these tribunals we talk about. But there was one other one which this January also finally burst like a cyst all over the Irish people.
Yeah, it's funny, like when you talk about shame, like anybody Irish who's honest and really thinks about this is aware of this terrible shame that's been ingrained into us, and it's a part of the culture that's, I'm not sure, can be understood by outsiders. But it was interesting. So what happened in the past week or two, I've never felt so ashamed of my country. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar that we had a system of mother and baby homes in Ireland and Magdalen laundries, where basically unmarried women or unmarried mothers would be institutionalised. It did depend on the background. You know, there were private nursing homes where you'd be, you know, you're in trouble. It was considered you're in trouble, and you'd be sent off to the nuns to have your baby, and maybe be adopted. Off you go, never hear about it again. You might get married, your husband never find out, you might have a life. And that's generally if you came from a wealthier background. Still an awful thing for a girl to go through, but it wasn't quite the same for everybody. But yeah, so girls were hidden away. Women and girls were hidden away. Not everybody had to be pregnant, but specifically we're looking at the mother and baby homes at the moment, because a report came out on the 12th of January about institutional abuse, about all of the wrongdoing. And it was a very long time coming. I think the bigger thing that's happened is it brought it back into everybody's consciousness at the moment, and an awful lot of people started coming out and talking about their stories. The report was a disgrace.
So we had a system here for 80 years where, because of the shame that a girl falling pregnant outside marriage, religious shame and shame in society, they were sent away from their families, cast out by their parents, by their fathers in the main, and put into these homes where they would stay while they had the kid, and the kid would be kept there. We're talking about somewhere in the order of 50 to 60,000 over a 70 or 80 year period. These homes only closed in the 90s, believe it or not. And something like 9,000 children and counting lost their lives when they were born there, because there wasn't enough medical supervision, and no one cared about these illegitimate children, as they were called. Illegitimate, a term that only was removed from our general society again in the 1990s. And these bastard children, as they were called, were just cast aside in society and left to rot in these homes. And literally,
I think even Irish people all know what it was and what this thing was, but I think people are grasping it. People don't really know where it came from. What happened was, we had obviously been ruled by the UK, so we had all of their systems in place. So we would have had poorhouses, which were then county homes. And in 1925, we had Minister for Health and Children, all that shit, wrote to one of the bishops, and there's actually evidence of the letters, and he basically said, we need to separate this problem of unmarried fallen women for their sins. We need to separate them from the respectable poor. So that was where the idea came, that they had to be set up, these institutions, and they were meant to be punitive. Also, there was a case of, we need to have the illegitimate children adopted, but they must be adopted by Catholic families. We can't have Irish children going to Protestant families, going to England. We can't have any of that. So that was where it came from. Women who had fallen pregnant were considered first offenders. Words like offenders, habitual sinners, hardened sinners. And so that's where it actually came from. A huge amount of it was political. Society did collude, but that has been used quite a bit in the past week or two, often by the government, to suggest that, we all played our part. And I find that a bit egregious, because I certainly didn't play my part, and not everybody played their part. And it's an easy way of letting the church off the hook and letting the government off the hook. But the government literally handed over control of schools and responsibility for all the social services that they couldn't get together, couldn't have been arsed getting together. And we also had an extremely Catholic government. De Valera's Ireland. Ireland, it was built as a theocracy. An awful lot of our government now come from political dynasties. So there's still arse covering, and their dads and their uncles were all heavily part of it. So there's still this brushing it under the carpet, shifting of blame, which is egregious, and the people who are falling victim yet again are the survivors, because there's this thing of a redress scheme, but it's wishy-washy as to whether they're going to get, how they're going to get redress, what that's going to look like. And 20 years ago there was a redress scheme, and what actually happened is people who were born in the institutions and went to industrial schools, like, guess what? They didn't have a great education, and they were severely damaged. So people who don't have the benefit of that education and found it very difficult to jump through hundreds of hoops didn't get their redress scheme. So it was a complete whitewash.
So yeah, this inquiry happens, and as ever, and this is where I think Ireland is changing. We have a gerontocracy is the word, which is we have all of these politicians, most of whom are playing 20th century politics in the 21st century. So our Prime Minister, their Taoiseach, arrives out, with this earnest, hand-wringing, altar boy-like confession saying, all of society let these women down, and, he's in many ways, he's right, because fathers should never be kicking their kids out and mothers should not, But one of the egregious lines in the actual report was that women didn't appear to be forced into these homes, and yet they're forced out of their house. Where else are they going to go? This is a sort of an infrastructure built to hide and, as you said, put under the carpet the shame. So the report comes out. There's many of these women still alive. There is the problem with a lot of women who gave up their babies into these homes are still alive and are terrified that their children might be able to get access to who they were. Of course, in all these situations, you hardly ever hear about the fathers. The fathers of these children are nowhere to be found. They're not even brought to book on any of this, which is a problem as well. And then when the report comes out, it's like, oh yeah, and then what happened? One of the ministers was trying to hide it then.
Yeah, sure. He was trying to rush through legislation that would seal the records, which is really fucking handy.
Yeah, so not only do we do a report and another inquiry that costs millions, that takes 5 years to do, once it comes out, our government are trying to seal it so that nobody can see it, which is just classic Irish.
Yeah, but I mean, one of the things you were mentioning there, like, yes, there was a societal problem, and, you have to take it into context that it was a theocracy. People were terrified. People were absolutely terrified of parish priests. And aside from people actually believing that they're going to burn in hell, and the things that we were told, even now, there isn't separation of church and state. So everything, like the hospitals, the schools, the church had massive power. So you have to take that into account when you say that people made choices and families, that they were making choices within an extreme. It was like we grew up in a cult. Absolutely untrue to say that they weren't forced in, because the guards went and took women back. They were chased. They were in fact imprisoned. Yeah. And women, and I say women, the youngest were 12. The youngest of the girls were 12. They were victims of incest. They were victims of rape. They gave birth without pain relief. They gave birth with often bitches and nuns telling them, you had your fun, now you have to suffer. You offer it up. They were heavily drugged afterwards. Young girls were handed forms and told you have to sign it, whilst get shitloads of Valium and everything else, and saying, oh, I'll wait till my mother comes in before I read the paper. No, and the baby would be gone. So it wasn't just that society caused this and society was poisoned by the state and church. It's a complete cover-up to say that people weren't imprisoned, that the guards didn't go and hunt girls down when they escaped, that babies weren't stolen, babies were starved, babies were fucked into septic tanks, babies were sold illegally, and there's evidence of that. There's evidence, countless survivors' accounts, where they were made to work in the nursery when they had to give up their own baby, which is cruel, and then they'd be made to count money in tins that came in American dollars. And these babies were sold to America. Yeah, so it wasn't just this unfortunate societal thing, and it was terrible the way things were, and we have to get away from that. No, there was criminal activity.
All of these homes were run by nuns, basically, so they were part of the church. And in one of them in County Galway, which is on the west coast of Ireland, in a place called Tuam, they discovered how many babies in a septic tank?
It was 796. So what happened was...
just stop there. 796 dead babies fucked into a septic tank. So you open the septic tank and there is just bones and skulls of little children in there.
So what actually happened with the Tuam situation, so I think everybody kind of knew. Everybody knew there was such thing as the Magdalen laundries and mother and baby homes. It was one of these things that we're all aware of, but had never really been taken out in modern context, and let's look what actually happened. But in Tuam in Galway, there was a mother and baby home run by the Bon Secours nuns. So what happened was there were two little boys playing in the area after the home had long since been knocked and there were housing estates going up, and they were jumping a wall to play in an orchard, and they landed on this kind of hollow ground and had a little look to see what was there, and they discovered a septic tank. Well, it was a concrete thing that had been used as a septic tank. They discovered loads of bones of what looked like kids and babies, and so of course they ran off and told all their friends in the neighbourhood, and they told their parents, and they were all kind of told, you don't play there anymore, none of that, we'll say no more about it. A local priest came and blessed the site, and that was that, end of. And then over the years, some local residents decided to clean the place up a little bit and put up a little plaque, and nothing really happened about it. But in 2012, there was a local historian called Catherine Corliss. She had published an article about the history of that particular mother and baby home in Tuam. She started looking for the death certificates of all the children who died there. It took her a couple of years, but there were thousands of death certificates she was going through, and eventually she comes up with this list of all of these babies, and it becomes the big story, and they go and they have a look, and it's cordoned off, and that's when it kind of came into focus for Irish people again in a modern context. It's never been. At the time, yeah, we'll have reports, we'll set up a committee, we'll yada yada yada. No such fucking thing really happens.
Yeah, so this woman, Catherine Corliss, without her, it would have just been, yeah, there's a little shrine to whatever the hell happened there. We don't want to know about it. We're afraid to uncover it.
But I mean, it wasn't the first place. I don't know what it was that hit so much there, because in the Bethany home in Dublin, there was 222 bodies found nearby. So this was like an ongoing thing. And then it looked into, well, sure, what did all these babies die of? Were their mothers told if they had died? They were just buried like dogs. No proper records, no proper burial. Were their families told? Were they given the chance to claim them?
And this is not.
It was just horrific.
And this is something that's not isolated or fringe. I mean, most of us in Ireland know somebody who had some dealings or was raised in, or gave a baby up. This is something that was throughout our society. And those regular listeners will know that Dawn is an activist for, she's a pro-choice activist when it comes to abortion. And abortion is difficult. But by the way, the pro-life movement here tends to be based on religion. It tends to be based on sin. It tends to be based on something that's very close to these homes that we're talking about. The pro-life movement
values.
Is the movement that cast women out. The pro-life movement is the one that allowed babies to die in ignominy in these homes. The pro-life movement is the one that hasn't set up proper refuge facilities for women over the years, which if they had, maybe would have made Ireland a place where abortion was not something that was immediately considered by women who fell into trouble. So they not only create the problem, they then pontificate from a height on the problem and continue to kind of do so.
Yeah, I mean, lots of countries around the world where not every child is born into a marriage and it's not such a big deal, but it was a massive problem here. Yeah, because exactly the people, the God-bothering Catholic family values people made it such that it was such an awful thing to have a child out of wedlock, that there'd be such shame that you couldn't survive, that the child would be illegitimate. And by the way, there were rules up into the late 80s about what an illegitimate child could and couldn't do. For instance, they couldn't do law, they couldn't become a doctor. That's how it was created. It was literally this thing that they were somehow scarred for life and they'd have no hope. And the same people who created that system used that as an excuse to take women's babies off them and to put them through this punishment. And they're the same people that then argue we can't have abortion. Why can't we support the mothers? I think like a lot of us talked like that in more recent years around repealing the 8th Amendment and bringing in abortion rights, talking about, you know what, all of the pro-life people say, oh, we have to support the mothers and we have to look after them and care for them. Bollocks, you never cared for them. You're exactly the people who made it difficult. But I actually watched a clip last weekend from the RTE archives, and it was a clip of from 1984 of a girl she'd fallen pregnant at 17, but she was there talking with her baby, who's about 2.5 at this stage, and she'd hidden her pregnancy, and then she'd gone into a home in Cork to have the baby, and she thought she was going to have the baby adopted out, and they shoved the forms under her nose when she didn't know what she was doing, and she came home without the baby. Somehow she managed to get the baby back. But this is the same year that the Eighth Amendment came in about abortion in Ireland. And as she's bouncing the baby on her knee and talking about how she's really, really lucky and how she's managing and how she'd love to go back to education, but she can't do that, and the father pissed off, and there's no problem with that. Her own father wouldn't have her back into the house. And she's talking about this, and she brings up the point that, you know, she's just so annoyed because she had to listen to everybody talking about looking after the mothers and supporting the mothers when they were trying to push in the Eighth Amendment, and then look what happened to her the same year. So it was really interesting to see somebody so brave and so forward thinking, making the point that we're all kind of coming to now. And she was living it, and she was in abject poverty. She was shamed, and she was the very lucky one who managed to get her baby back and seemed to be getting through all that. And I'd love to see how she turned out and how her little girl turned out. But it's just the same shit, different decade.
Yeah, so we're starting to uncover these things where we've got a braver populace now. We've got a populace that's not afraid of government, and it's certainly not afraid of our church anymore. But
we do and we don't. I think we're now asking, I mean, this conversation has been ongoing and it crops up because something big happens and it comes up again. But this time is the first time I really felt more and more people kind of asking the question, why are we still taking shit from the church? Why are we still bringing our kids off to get their christenings? Like we'd call somebody who crosses the picket line a scab. What do we call people who hand over their kids to the church and send their kids in to make their first confession? Like, how is that not spitting in the face of survivors? And I'm finding more people who wouldn't necessarily be as brazenly political and mouthy as you or I might be. More and more people are kind of going, no, fuck this. When are we going to say fuck off? And when are we going to punish the church? I mean, the church is one of the wealthiest organisations in the world. The amount of money they have in property, in land, like the property portfolio they have for buildings in London alone is just breathtaking. So why aren't we seizing their assets? Like, we have a criminal assets bureau. They sold babies. They kept girls and women in slavery. And they worked them doing the laundries. That is fucking criminal. So why aren't we seizing their assets? Canada did it 20 years ago with the Christian Brothers that ran industrial schools. And it wasn't just the Christian Brothers, it wasn't just Catholic organisations, but, you know, a load of them went bankrupt. There was $2 billion estimated in 2001 that they were going to have to pay in redress. $1 billion alone was Catholic organisations. So Canada did it. Why the fuck can't we?
Indeed. So, you know, not a lot of laughs on this week's podcast, but, you know, if you wanted to sum everything up, and not just from an Irish perspective, we have a world that is built on religions, be that Judaism, Catholicism, Islam, or whichever one you want to pick. Those religions tend to be, many of them, based on shame and hypocrisy and misogyny. We have a economic system called capitalism that is based on greed and hypocrisy and inequality. And they're the two pillars on which we have built the world over the last 100, 200 years. And that's the bit that needs to change. And things like COVID might be and climate change are the planet's way of telling us that we're not doing this right.
I think the similarity I see with those two threads is this idea of morals, whether it be religious morals, whether it be coming from a capitalist system of pull your boots up, you know, work hard and shaming poor people, and like just this lack of fucking empathy. It's all morals and pontificating. And my take on people who are particularly moralistic, whether it be from a religious point of view or a capitalist point of view, it's generally, I follow this rule, and this rule, and therefore I don't ever have to look myself in the mirror before I go to bed at night and go, have I been kind? Have I upset people? Have I had empathy? Have I been a bit of an arsehole? I don't have to do that because I hit all the milestones. I didn't commit any of the sins, and I get to throw stones at anybody who didn't do that. And it's this moralistic thing, aside from the fact that they're not necessarily my morals, it leaves people devoid of empathy and humanity and showing their fellow man dignity and kindness. And so we do need a new ism. We need ethics, we need empathy, we need responsibility to our fellow human, and none of the fucking moralistic shite. Yes.
Again, as I said, not a huge amount of laughs this week. But the Don has, as ever, we're coming to the end of her top 20 countdown. She's up to number 2. They're in no particular order, I don't think. But we're going to reveal number 2 in the Don's top 20 podcast. And as ever, she gives me a couple of clues to see if I can remember who it was I spoke to. What's clue number 1?
Clue number 1 is get a life, not a job.
Get a life, not a job. Okay, next one.
Next one is establish what you want early on in life. That can change all the time, but set yourself targets and goals. Work on a 5-year plan.
Oh, I'm being beaten again. Number 3.
I had to go back and sell this mad, crazy idea to a bunch of very disillusioned people.
I don't think I've ever not got it. No, it's beaten me. Who is it?
Yeah, it's a bit closer to home. Like really, really close to home for you.
It's my sister, is it?
It is George.
George Boyle, who's under a huge amount of pressure at the moment. Those of you listening the last time may have heard me reveal that my parents are in a bit of medical trouble over the last 4 weeks. They seem to be recovering, which is great. So hi to both of them if they're listening. George is my younger by 18 months sister, and she's an architect, and she has a great story to tell about what happened when everything fell to pieces during the economic crash here in Ireland. And she picked herself up with her husband Mikey after losing her job, just having given birth to her second child, and set up a workspace for people who'd lost their jobs called the Fumbly Exchange. So that's the story, and it's a very, very powerful one. And again, I remember when she was doing it, I was surprised. My sister is somebody who is a bit of a dreamer, which is what's great about her. I always say she'd make a great Lord Mayor. Maybe she'll go for that at some point in her future. But yeah, what did you take from it?
It's a story of hope and resilience, and like walking into 2021 with all of the economic fallout that there's going to be, and even just the fact that we're kind of back to where we were last year, but worse. People are tired. There's no point in planning anything. So I thought the ambition and drive is really waning. So I thought this would be a really good story to kind of inspire people. And what we're lacking, she seems to somehow be able to do all that. I didn't expect that you'd get into mentioning the civil service and the infantilization of those, but I think she has a very interesting take. At one point she's talking about, sorry, George, I'm paraphrasing, but, that leaving a job and becoming self-employed and having to do your own stuff, you're not parented anymore. You have to do your own taxes. You have to organize every little thing. And that kind of struck with me because I'm the opposite of that. I could not be the person that has to organise everything. I mean, at one point I considered doing teaching despite school being the worst time of my life, purely because there's a clear path and everything's organised for you. So I have huge respect for that. I don't know quite how she does that, but I think it's a great story. It's something to be really proud of, and I think it's something that people could really do with listening to it now.
So apologies for this poor sound on this week's show. Apologies for the perhaps lack of gags and laughter. It's been a bit of a somber January for everybody. They say that all revolutions start with the sound of one voice. My sister is a great example of that in action. Love you, sis. Here she is. We'll see you next time on A Pint with Shawnee B. Bye.
Don't forget to wash your hands and wear your masks. Bye.
Good afternoon, George.
Hi, Sean.
I have George on the show because she has a good story to tell about what happens when everything goes belly up and you're left floundering and you have to pick yourself up off the ground. And my sister and all the people in Fumbly Exchange did a very good job of doing that when the Irish economy collapsed around us. George's story is very well known in Ireland, and she's probably going to have to tell it all again here, which she's done many times before. But essentially, my sister was an architect. So let's start with you getting into architecture and why and what happened.
We all kind of were encouraged to think at school about the pathway to the job for life. Our dad being an engineer and our mum being an artist, I kind of put the two into a pot and stirred it around, and out came architect. So I said I'll give that a go. Proceeded to pretty much hate college. But I was like, I'm either going to fail this spectacularly, in which case I'm done with it, or I'm going to do really well at it, in which case I'm done with it. Because I had proved to myself I can conquer it. And I never did either, so I kind of mullocked along somewhere in the middle, somewhere around the pass point.
I
like
remember
that.
you had a great idea for your thesis. I remember back in the day. Do you want to talk about that?
I was very interested in the circus. So I decided to do a winter home for Fawcett Circus, and I picked a little island off Howth called Ireland's Eye, and I designed a boat to take the circus out there. The island became like a theme park almost, of all the different follies, with all the different disciplines the circus gets up to, and cages for animals, and they were allowed to kind of roam around, and it wasn't taken very seriously.
Island.
It's a deserted island
Right.
at the moment, but it wasn't taken very seriously by my tutors, and one of them would actually make a big fuss about walking out every time my crit came on. And at the very end of fifth year then, again, I kind of came out at the bottom of the pile of passes, and then the external examiners came in and they pulled me right up to third in the class, which was
Just
kind of
shows
nice.
you. Just shows you. Did anything ever happen to that?
No, but I sort of look back on it recently and I think, God, it might be my best work. You see, I think there was just a sense that I wasn't embracing realism, that I was kind of a fantasist. And well, what other time are you going to do that other than in college? And the great thing about it was that Murray O'Leary, where I spent 20 working years, that was one of the external examiners who was there. Sean O'Leary was there.
So they were the biggest architecture firm in Dublin, right?
Yeah, they were in the top 60 in the world. They were probably in the top 15 in Europe.
And Ireland was booming.
Booming, going kind of gangbusters from around. I started with them in 95 and then they went into bonkers growth for about 5 to 6 years. Things started to look a little bit shaky in 2008, but really right up to the wall, everybody thought there was no chance of anything going wrong.
I used to talk to you a bit about this because the collapse of the Irish economy, for those who don't know about it, was monstrous. It was fueled by a property boom primarily. Everyone was getting out of control here. We're normally a nation that is best when we're underdogs and we haven't got two pennies to rub together. But I was coming home from overseas and seeing people talking about buying houses in Lithuania and Latvia and countries they didn't even know existed 5 years ago. And it wasn't that pleasant a place to come and visit at the time because it was just consumed by greed, and it was the first time I'd seen my home city and my home country in that shape. But the collapse when it happened, and again, I always used to say this to you guys, like the idea that architecture in a housing boom is a canary in the mine, I just found it astonishing that nobody was seeing writing on the wall. And what was it, just bravado or?
It was denial. So I think that the property boom was fueled, yes, by greed. I think people got on the bandwagon because they were encouraged to. I think people were naive, and I think it was less an embrace of greed than a kind of a sense of the time has come and we need to join the Western world and stand up and be like the others. And I mean, when you look at big cities like in China and Singapore, these places, like how rapidly they grew, in the Middle East as well, there was no sense that it had to stop. I mean, there's plenty of evidence that these things can continue and be sustainable.
Right.
But the problem in Dublin was that there was no regulation, there was no control. People were getting letters in their door saying, you need to buy a house and here's how we're going to give you 100% mortgage. And it was utterly irresponsible governance. So, for example, in many architectural practices, suddenly you weren't getting paid, but you'd made commitments, and the commitments you had under contract with the government, with big developers, with all sorts of people. The naivety of our peers was that they felt that would protect them. There were hundreds of thousands of apartments built all over the country, and the architects were never paid for those. So, you would say a good business person would stop work as soon as the first check bounces, but architects aren't good business people.
Yeah. So then tell me what happened to Murray O'Leary during this time.
So in the space of probably a year, Murray O'Leary went from a very healthy, profitable company to a company heavily in debt, but the debts were written down by the promises. And then the promises just turned into dust. So one day it all went bust. It was frightening but my overwhelming sense at that point was relief. There was a relief on a personal level that I went down with the ship, I survived to the end, and there was a relief that what I do from now on is not dependent on someone else. I can make it myself, but I didn't know I could make it to that.
So you then came up with this idea. So talk about the idea and how you came up with it.
So I basically did a whole load of homework on where I might go and where I might start my own business, and the first thing I did was I rang the landlord of the building that Murray O'Leary had been in, because I was the lead architect on that building, so I had a really good relationship with the landlord, and Murray O'Leary was the last of 6 companies to evacuate, so it was 100,000 square feet, sold off the plans at €42 a square foot back in 2005, and now empty. So it was a big deal for him, and he said I could have anywhere in the building free of charge, for my new practice, which was very generous. But I kind of knew that there was so many people in the same position as myself. I thought, could we come up with something that would allow all of them to start with me if they were starting their own thing?
I mean, but the collapse affected everybody.
And the collapse affected everybody. And yeah, once you kind of realise what it feels like, you realise that maybe there might be wisdom in trying to just see if there's a way of empowering people to just get off the dole or get out of the depression. And I mean, to put it in perspective, friends of mine who would have been driving Saabs and taking 3 or 4 holidays a year, some of these people ended up in breadline queues.
Unemployment rose to 20-something%.
Nationwide, and among architects it was over 85%. The majority of architectural practices shut down. So I thought that maybe we could collect a group, help them start again, start something new, or restructure what they had, or just bring an energy together to tease out what the challenges were. And casting the net a bit broader than architecture, but I thought the creative force was really important, because you need people who are kind of capable of initiating and leading. That was the first thing, was getting that group idea right. And then the landlord had offered me the free space, and I said, well, what about free space for 30? And he said, yeah, no problem, we'll run it for a few months. And then I did a lot of homework on it, and I realised that there's a lot of free spaces with universities and all across the Netherlands and Denmark and places like that, but they tend to be just places where people moan and complain about how bad things are over coffee, and they don't really tend to have a great success rate, and neither do incubators and neither do accelerators and serviced office spaces. They're all a bit soulless. So we wanted to create a character and a mandate. What is this thing going to do? And then we also wanted to create a price point that was just out of reach.
So this is basically aimed at people who've lost their job, want to get back up on their feet, want a place to go with like minds, and they have to pay a weekly sub to go there. So how much was it to go in there at the start?
$250 ex-VAT a month.
A month, okay. That's pretty good.
It's really good.
What did that include?
That included, so that was the other thing, is to take away the overheads that would make finding a place very discouraging. So we included all your utility bills, your insurance, your housekeeping. We brought in pro bono services then from tax accountants and start-up businesses and legal and all those things to give people advice and help them out. And people were very willing to do this, because the people who were surviving were realising that, I suppose, they needed to give something back. They were feeling guilty.
And how many of you pulled this together?
So I sent around a manifesto then. I rang Dublin City Council, and I rang the institute heads of the different design organisations to see would they give me support, and they were like, oh, we've no money. And I said, I'm not looking for money, can I use your logo on my documents if I write a document? And they said, oh, of course, yes, we'd be delighted. I sent a call to arms document with an expression of interest, no strings attached, fill out the form, send it back to me. So I got about 40 responses from that, and then I called a meeting, and about 60 people came to the meeting, and out of that about 10 people signed up there, and then we had to populate the office and put in furniture and do all that kind of stuff.
Where did you get the money for the furniture?
We didn't. We went skipping and liquidator shopping, and we got... So in the old offices, the old architecture practice, the liquidator sold everything, even I had left a hat up there, and they even had a price on the hat. But they didn't have any price on the fitted furniture, which had been probably the pièce de résistance of the whole office, beautiful birch ply, handmade furniture attached to the walls, and for the liquidator that was part of the shell and core. But a gaming company came in then not a gaming company, recruitment company came in to take over the space, and they didn't want any of that stuff. So the landlord was going to hire a skip to get rid of it, and we said we'd dismantle it. And
And how did it look after a year? What was your progress?
Within 6 months, we had 60 businesses.
You caught the attention of the media because there was no good news stories in Ireland, right?
So one of the co-founders is Kieran Ferry, and his father started an online newspaper, which was like unheard of in those days, called The Irish Emigrant. The Wall Street Journal in New York were doing a 6-piece documentary about Europe, and they had done their Iceland and their Spain and their Italy and their Greece video documentary with riots and bombs and all sorts of things going on, and they came to Ireland and they rang the Irish Emigrant and said, we need to know about all the people who are leaving Ireland and how bad it is here and all that stuff. And in good old Irish fashion, Liam Ferry said, it's not all that bad now, talk to my son. They've started this thing up in Dublin 8, and it's in the Liberties, the heart of gritty Dublin, and that's where the working class came from. He did a piece about Ireland and how desperate it was, but it ended with Fumble Exchange and how we were the scrappy little workhorse of Europe and we were going to pull Europe out of recession. That didn't do us any harm.
When you realised the idea was a workspace like you have in many cities around the world, full of creative people who are usually sole traders, 1 or 2 person operators.
Yeah.
But you had a little twist on that, right, where they would work sort of together?
Yeah, so our mantra is making work, full stop, together. So the making work part is about actually invention, finding opportunity where people don't think it exists, and that's my definition of innovation anyway. I think what really set Fumbly Exchange apart was we had the bit to help our colleagues scale. We had the bit about creative collaboration. So the creative bit is getting the right kind of mindset, and the collaboration is getting people to showcase each other's skills to each other. So we've all sorts of programs that help to support really integrating the different skill sets into the group. But then we have the outside the room piece, which is about using our community to help vacancy and dereliction and antisocial behaviour and neighbourhood problems outside the room. So we would run exhibitions and festivals and barbecues and parties and all that kind of stuff, trying to help people get out of that defensive sort of protect what I've got left mentality. And
so you're looking for a mindset, positive, upbeat,
self-starter, and we never advertise. And that's a really important part of it, because if we were advertising, we would be getting anybody. But by not advertising, people come because they've heard about it. So they're kind of almost pre-approved.
And then Guinness stepped in and you won some big award, right?
Kieran Rose, this guy in Dublin City Council, was a great advocate. And he nominated me for this Social Entrepreneur of the Year award. So Diageo was recognising people who do good, and 2011 we won that award. So all of this kind of led to, I suppose, that we had a profile all the time really out there without ever seeking it.
And all the politicians came as sniffing as well, right?
Oh yeah, so we before we won the Guinness Award, the only money we had was a little kitty for milk money, because the subscription charge went straight to the landlord. So when we won the award, there was a couple of bob came with that, and we used that to build the brand and the identity and the logo and the website.
Done by people in the exchange.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we registered it and we launched it. And when we launched it, they couldn't come quick enough, the politicians, because it was probably the only good news story in town. And at that stage we were 60 strong, and it was incredible. And because we were doing all these community and neighbourhood events, it was a constant magnet. I mean, we knew we'd arrived when the Olympic flame was travelling through Dublin and it stopped at Fumbley Lane.
But then your very friendly landlord caused some problems. Is that the next chapter in this?
Yeah, so because of the magnet effect, all these new crazy hipster companies were coming down going, we want to be part of this, we want to settle in near you. So our landlord's 100,000 square foot of empty accommodation was filling up fast.
But you were paying him, right?
We were paying him, but we had no lease. So we had no protection, and to be honest, it's always a matter of personalities. So Nama took over the landlord company.
So explain what NAMA is.
So NAMA was an organisation set up by the Irish government to become like a bad bank. So basically NAMA took out of the good, in quotation mark, banks all the bad debt. It sought to reconcile them as best it could and then sell the assets. So one of the properties that it took over was our landlord's company, and all our landlord contacts were let go. Because
so you're 3 years in roughly?
3 years in,
And
yeah.
how many people then?
We had about 70 businesses then.
Right. So you had to move?
Yeah, so they came, basically we knew we had to move, so we made an application to government for an adjacent property, which was also in the landlord's tenure, and we were granted over 200,000 to do up the property by government, and the landlord had made the application for us, but a couple of days before the grant was due in, the landlord let it to somebody else.
Nice.
Yeah, so they then told us that there was somebody with their eye on our premises and that we had to move. They gave us 3 months' notice. I found another place in Stephen's Green. We had signed everything over and had paid our utility connection costs and changed addresses on our brochures and everything. Aircom were a subtenant. We were a tenant. We were going to be subtenants, and the Royal College of Surgeons decided they wanted the building back. So was
this a factor of the sort of early shoots of recovery and people starting to sniff, we might be able to get things going again, so businesses like yours go, thanks for that, but we're moving?
Yeah, I think it's a factor of creative clusters since like ever. You know, I mean, if you go back to Renaissance times, Temple Bar here, the same thing, you know, I mean, Philadelphia, Boston, Chicago. You get a little creative cluster, it generates a kind of interest level. Richard Florida, there's this guy who talks about it all the time, the creative class. It's a magnet, everybody wants a piece of it, and then the property value goes up and it kind of, so it shoves out. So we knew then we had to get a bit more savvy, so we got pro bono legal aid, thanks to Social Entrepreneurs Ireland. We won that award as well. We got a 10-year lease on this place. So basically what happened was Royal College of Surgeons kicked us out of Stephen's Green. Aircom, in fairness to them, were appalled, and they had this premises in the middle of the city, which was in really rag order. It was a former claims office, and it had tiny little rooms with really low ceilings.
Which we're in right now.
Yeah, and swipe card
Very
access.
high ceilings.
Yeah. So I was kind of at the end of my tether at that point. I was burnt out, I was exhausted, and I went back to the group and I said, look, Stephen's Green is gone. We have an option on this place on Dame Lane. I said, I just don't think we can do it. It's going to cost too much. It's going to cost me too much personally in terms of investment of time and everything. And
Were you feeling at any stage this is all getting too hard? And
that day was the closest I got to it, the day where I said...
And the surgeons kicked you out.
Yeah, and I found this place and I just knew it was going to be intense. I mean, at that stage we were evicted. People had gone home to their kitchen tables and stuff. So I came in here and
it's
I looked...
It's very ironic, the way that government jumps on your bandwagon, and then it's still, all of these are government stroke institutional bodies that are kind of causing you problems. This building, though, was in a mess, yeah?
Absolutely. I mean, the tiny little rooms, very, very dark. The furniture was all still here. The bins hadn't been emptied. It was like 2 years sitting here. There were things scurrying around. There was no electricity. We had to get around by flashlight, and the fridges hadn't been emptied. It was like...
boy.
Really...
So it was like a ghost ship that just been abandoned.
Yeah. And I got up into the roof space and I looked through all the dust and I saw these beams, and that's when I said, okay, this is going to be worth it. Because
and then what happened? Did you have to do the same?
I had to go back and sell this mad, crazy idea to a very disillusioned bunch of people. And in fairness to them, they said, go for it. And what they had allowed us to do, the landlord, when things got horribly crazy after the surgeons' Stephen's Green property collapsed, they allowed us to collect the last 2 months' rent from everybody, the subscription fee. So we had that tiny little nest of, I think it was probably about 10,000. And then we went to Leo, which was the local area enterprise office, and they gave us about 30,000. And then we went to tender for this to see how much it would cost, and they said it would take about 6 to 8 months, and it would cost between 180 and 220,000.
To refit it?
To refit a 4-storey over basement building. And that was on my birthday in 2013 we signed the lease and we were open on the 1st of August.
Brilliant.
And
How
we
did you get it fixed?
didn't spend more than our budget of 38,000.
Ah,
The main reason it got up and running was that on probably the first day I came in on my own after signing the lease with the keys, I opened the door and I found myself ankle deep in water and the place was flooding and I had no idea how or why, so I sat on the stairs and I had a little cry and thought,
contributed to the flooding.
this is, Alice in Wonderland style. This is just what I needed. And the next thing I heard somebody say, "You look like you're in trouble." And I looked up and there was this fellow standing in the building and I was like, how can there be somebody in the building when we own the building? We're lease owners now. And it turned out that he used to be the Mechanelec consultant for Aircom and he just wanted to see what was going on. And within a few seconds he had made a few calls and a gang of people came in with water vacuums and he stopped the leak and he said, "Now, my name's Brian. What are you doing?" And I told him what we were doing and he got air conditioning, plumbing, electrics and IT fit out free of charge for us. Probably around 70,000's worth. Kingspan did all our insulation for us.
Amazing. And so now what's it look like now?
When we were in our little more comfortable zone between 2011 and 2013, we opened 2 sister satellite versions of Humble Exchange in Balbriggan and Waterford. And they're working very well and have also made a huge difference in regeneration in the areas that they're in. And we opened in 2014 in Italy, in Ravenna.
So how did you open in Italy?
So one of my friends who was in college with me lives in Bologna. Things weren't great in Italy either, so she did the same thing and she clustered a group together and they couldn't really see how to organise their way out of it. So they found an old Garibaldi archery school and have basically sweet-talked the owners there into using the premises. And I mean, with the satellites, we've had an awful lot of people talk to us about co-working, and it happens at least twice a week that somebody from somewhere says they want to open something like this. But most of them don't want to kind of do the voluntary community social enterprise piece. They just want to have...
You're going to keep that as part of the brand.
Yeah, it's a very important part of it.
What sort of lessons have you learned? What sort of advice would you give to people setting out today?
Yeah, well, I mean, first thing is get a life, not a job. I just can't believe, I feel like I kind of stepped into Oz the day I came out of employment. You know, it was like kind of living in black and white before that. And that whole thing of being parented, post-parenting, you know, it's like your taxes are paid for you, you know, your laundry's practically done for you, just to keep you kind of in that zone where you'll perform for the boss. So very much I'm all about taking responsibility for your future and establish what you want early on in life. Now, I mean, that can change all the time, but at least set yourself targets and goals, work to a 5-year plan and see how much more living time you get and much more quality you can get out of your life.
So after that dramatic story, what's next then?
Okay, so now, I mean, everything has changed in Ireland again. It's looking like the economy in Dublin particularly is set to rocket. As an architect, the canary in the mine, great analogy, because we did start to see interest, not money, but interest accumulating from about 2 years ago. It's turning now into a fairly healthy bottom line for most of our business members. So Fumble Exchange is more now about new ways of working, new ways of thinking, how to incorporate integrity and authenticity into the kind of business you create. And we've also started an initiative called the FEX Academy, which is a learning program for people who are too cool for school, too busy to kind of get into third level commitments and would prefer to learn on the hoof in small parcels. So we run it like a kind of a crowdsourcing website where programs are posted and if people are interested in them they can sign up, and it's a very much on-demand learning platform, and we're hoping to get accreditation from the Department of Education for that. For example, Trinity College have a very strong interest in innovation and entrepreneurship, but they're very much a dinosaur because they're based on a 600-year-old model or whatever it is. So it's like a kind of a learning laboratory to kind of work hand in hand with them. So I'm entrepreneur in residence at the moment in the business school in Trinity. We're actually developing a kind of phenomenon now where businesses are getting big. They want to fledge out of here, but they don't want to lose the connection. They want to keep part of the community. So we're looking at a few residence where those pledge units can be still part of the Fumbly Exchange. So it's almost kind of
alma mater kind of
becoming a bit like a movement.
Is there any part of you that says, well, you know, the thing that you did, which was pick yourself and a bunch of other people together as a community up by the bootstraps and get something done in a city and a political environment that seems to just be too hard all the time? Have you any aspirations to start taking that further and maybe going and trying to change other areas of Ireland, government, whatever, i.e. being the mayor or something?
There's been a lot of approaches from people who think maybe I should be in the political forum. But, I mean, as architect, I did the 25-year plan for Leinster House. So I've seen a lot of what goes on in there firsthand. The great thing about being this maverick on the outside who now has the respect of these organisations is I can pretty much say what I think without being cut down at the knees. If I go into a system like that, I'm going into an old boys club, back to being the little girl in the corner, and I won't really get the voice.
How big a asset was your naivety in hindsight?
It was a combination of my absolutely horrendous naivety as a business person and as a person who engages with government or authority of any kind, because I have no respect for authority at all, and a fairly decent education and experience profile. So I kind of was able to carry through what I said I was going to do, which I think there's a lot of people who are mavericks in their head, but they can't actually complete what they say they're going to do. So they didn't have, I think that stood to me.
Long may it continue, Georgina, or George, sorry, I'm used to calling you Georgina. George is her brand name. Anyway, that was a wonderful chat and a great story. Wishing you every success in the future with Fumbly Exchange and wherever else you may go. And we'll probably see you at home tonight for a cup of tea.